How to make good decisions. I invite you today on a journey into our research at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development on decision-making in an uncertain world. I will start with the distinction between risk and uncertainty, a distinction that is often made but not really liked by many. I will introduce the concept of heuristics and give you a few examples of that, including how a Nobel laureate doesn't follow his own theory. Then I will introduce you a bit into the science of heuristics, so how to build heuristics that make the world a safer place, as in the example of the Bank of England, but in general, how heuristic decision-making is the only thing you can do in an uncertain world, where optimization is a fiction. And I will give you an application of heuristic research in how to reduce black box algorithms to simple heuristics and enable people to understand how they're being scored, in this case in credit scoring. So that's the program. Are you ready? Then let's start. So I brought a quote by Herbert Simon. Who is Herbert Simon? Herbert Simon is the only person so far that has both a Nobel Memorial Prize in economics and a Turing Prize in AI, computer science. Now, Herbert Simon said, the question of bounded rationality is, how do human beings reason when the conditions for rationality postulated by the model of neoclassical economics are not met? That question is a heresy to people like Milton Friedman and also to, quite many social scientists. The answer is that in these situations, Homo economicus turns into Homo heuristicus. And I will introduce that. Who is Homo heuristicus? That's you. Making decisions in an uncertain world, not knowing what will happen, and not being able to foresee the world, and nevertheless trying to do the best. So let me start with the first distinction. Okay. It takes some time until it wants to do it. The distinction is between risk and uncertainty. Risk means that you know all the possible future states of the world, all the consequences, and also their probabilities. It's a world of certainty. Example, when you go into the casino this evening and play roulette, you are in a world of certainty. That is risk. Nothing unexpected can happen. The future states of the world are numbers between 0 and 36. And you know the consequences and you know the probabilities. This is why many people who are addicted to roulette play roulette, not to win, but to be in a world where everything is certain. And they don't have to deal with humans, where you have to make inferences about their intentions and other things. So, a world of uncertainty is one where this knowledge is not possible. So one cannot foresee everything that can happen. And that's the case most of the time in our lives. And the important thing is that in a world of risk, you can calculate the optimal action and use the mathematical optimization calculus. You can't do that under uncertainty. And that's one of the reasons why not too many scholars want to study uncertainty. They want to use their Bayesian algorithm. They want to use the expected utility maximization procedure. And the point is, in order to study decision-making under uncertainty, we need to look for something else, something that people do every day. It's called heuristics. A heuristic is a rule of thumb. For instance, we just talked about this lecture before. If you want to increase participation rates in this lecture series by 50%, use a rule of thumb. There will be always cookies served afterwards. That works with American students wonderfully. So, Herbert Simon coined the term satisficing, both as a general term in opposition to optimizing, meaning not that satisficing is something that you do because you're dumb or limited, but because optimizing cannot be done under uncertainty. And I will give you a few examples about heuristics. And let me introduce the difference between a situation of risk, where you can optimize, and a situation of uncertainty, where you use heuristics. Harry Markowitz from the University of Chicago got his economics Nobel Prize for solving the following task: how to allocate your money across a number of n assets. And the solution that he proposed is standard probability theory. That entails you need to estimate the means, the expected returns of all n assets, their variances and their covariances. But it's done. Nobel Prize won. When Harry Markowitz made his own investments for the time after his retirement, he used his Nobel Prize winning optimization method. So we might think, no, he did not. He used a simple heuristic that we call 1 over n. So 1 over n means allocate your money equally to each of the n funds. So if you have just two options, 50-50. 3, a third, a third, a third. This is a heuristic. A heuristic ignores information, but not because the person who uses it is lazy or incompetent. I mean, Markowitz invented the optimization method, but because in a world of uncertainty, heuristics can do better than optimal. And one can check that. The study that is mentioned is by De Miguel and colleagues, tested Markowitz model versus 1 over n in 7 real investment problems, all about stocks. So you can see whether you make more money with the optimization method or with 1 over n. What was the result? According to standard measures like Sharpe ratio, 1 over n won 6 out of 7 times over the optimization method. Now, the point is not that heuristics are always better or that optimization is always better. The point is we need to think about the conditions under which it pays to make complex computation and where it does not pay. This is the essential question that I call the question of ecological rationality. You need to think about the world. And a very first answer is if that would be a world of risk. So if the banks would play in a casino, then you could calculate. But since the world of stock markets is an uncertain world, here, simpler, robust methods can actually succeed. And then you can go a step further and use standard statistics that tells you the larger the number of assets you have, n, the more covariances you need to estimate, the more error you will have, and you better go simple. As opposed, if it's just a few, then it may be different. So that's the kind of thinking. Note that this thinking is quite new. If you think about heuristics the Kahneman and Tversky way, that question never occurs because it's always the expected utility maximization, the consistency axioms that are always best. But they're not always best. You can't optimize under uncertainty. So another interesting observation is that Harry Markowitz, who used 1 over n, would not have got the Nobel for 1 over n. It needs to be something complex. So here, this is the Homo Heuristicus version, the Homo economicus version, the same person. So the study of heuristics and of ecological rationality has been founded by Herbert Simon. And Herbert Simon, for the term ecological rationality, he used an analogy of a pair of scissors. So basically saying that if you want to understand behavior, it is not enough to look into the mind. And most psychologists just look in the mind and come up with concepts like risk aversion, loss aversion, or personality traits. But Simon argued you need to look at the mind and the environment and how they fit together. So if you just look at one blade of a pair of scissors, you will never understand why they cut so well. So they have to fit together. And that is the term here of adaptation. So whether a certain rule or a certain strategy is adapted to the problem at hand. That's a much more difficult question than just saying risk averse is bad or loss aversion is irrational. No concept is by itself irrational. Even overconfidence is usually presented as something you should avoid. But if we wouldn't have a bit too much confidence, there would be no startups. And Europe probably wouldn't have yet discovered America. So that's the Frank Knightian view about how do you deal with uncertainty, heuristics, good intuitions, and courage, rather than logical thinking that doesn't help you so much. Our research program poses 3 questions. So, first, what is in the adaptive toolbox of an individual or an organization or an entire species? So that's about the heuristics in their building blocks. So we have just met one heuristic, 1 over n. And 1 over n can be used in many occasions, not only for investing in stocks. For instance, are there parents here who have 2 or more children? How do you distribute your time and your love across these children? It's an investment problem. And many parents use 1 over n. It has a kind of moral message of justice in it. And the building blocks, the evolved capacities, they exploit. And the question is, how are heuristics learned and selected? Because there are several possible things. Then this is a descriptive question. Then the normative question is about ecological rationality. So in which environments does a given strategy work and where will it fail? And that question is not only relevant for heuristics, but also for optimization rules like Bayes' rule. Bayes' rule works in a world of risk, what Jimmy Savage called a small world, because it does only one thing, namely to update a probability distribution in a new one, given the evidence. And to have a probability distribution, you need to know all the options or all the events. And you can't do this in uncertainty. So that's a much more general perspective on rationality. And it's based on the pair of scissors. And finally, one can use all these insights to, in the study of what I call intuitive design, that is, help people by designing heuristics that work, and also changing environments that are fit to what people do intuitively. So I will now, in the rest of the talk, give you examples from the adaptive toolbox, for ecological rationality and intuitive design. That's it. So let's start. The adaptive toolbox has a number of heuristics that are based on cognitive capacities, like the ability to recognize objects, faces, or names. And the heuristics can be social, or aspiration-based, or based on equality, like 1 over n that you just saw. Social heuristics are very popular. For instance, imitation. Now, without imitation, there would be no culture. And young children imitate more generally and more precisely than, say, our next neighbors like chimpanzees. They also imitate, but not as precisely. And imitation is used in businesses. For instance, in 2015, Amazon released Echo, an internet-based home assistant device, was a huge success. And then Google released a similar one called Google Home, and Apple did the same. That's one of the major ways that organizations work. Or remember Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the founders of Google. They copied the pay-per-click business model of a rival search engine called GoTo.com, and then improved it by adding an auction model. So this is an example that much of what's going on in the world of management and business is based on imitation. And in some cultures are very positive to imitation, like China. In the Western world, we rather, don't imitate. I remember when I was for the first time at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the dean asked me, Professor Gigerenzer, tell me what we need to do so that we become as famous as the Max Planck Society. No German president of a university had ever asked this question to me. And by being open to this, this is part of the Chinese success. Imitate, and when you have the level, then go off from there. So that's an example for imitation. Word of mouth. In a very effective strategy for hiring people. In a study of 20 years of labor and social security records in Munich, word of mouth, that means in order to hire, you don't advertise, but you ask your own employees, do you know someone who is reliable and a good person for this job that's open? And it turns out it's one of the most efficient hiring strategies that exist. And most important, people who are hired by word of mouth stay longer on the job than those who are hired in other ways. And finally, wisdom of crowds. So you may know that Lego Ideas is an online platform where fans of Lego, they play the blocks, can show their latest products, their imagination, their latest design, and then they vote on these things. And that's used by the company, Lego, to get new ideas by wisdom of crowds. So what I will do now is to take one of the heuristics that have from the class of one reason heuristics and go a little bit into deeper. I can't do much more in this lecture. And it's about fast and frugal trees. What is a fast and frugal tree? Let me explain this with an example about hiring. When Jeff Bezos was young, and Amazon was young too, he did himself the hiring. And part of our research is to analyze what experts do and then model it. And what you see here is a model of Jeff Bezos' strategy. He asked only 3 questions. First, does this person possess an exceptional ability? Now you might ask why. Even if the person is an excellent violinist, which has little to do with the Bezos job, that brings along a number of other abilities that are desirable. Namely, that person likely has learned to concentrate, to stay on the problem, to sweat. And if it's a player in an orchestra or a group, then also to cooperate with others. Now, if that's not the case, immediately the decision is not hire. A fast and frugal tree can make a decision after every question. But it's not enough to have an exceptionability. The second question then is, in the case of yes, will you admire this person? That's also a very unusual idea. That's certainly an assessment that I would not look at. Now, Bezos explained why. Namely, he said, it's not only that I want to have good people, I want to learn from them. And I can learn better if I admire a person. If no, not hire. And if yes, a final question, whether this person will raise the average level of effectiveness in the group he or she will be there. Only then higher. So, note there are no probabilities in this tree. There are no utilities. But is it a heuristic that tells you what to do? And you can also test it whether other people do it or not. And a fast and frugal tree is a decision tree it's defined as one with n, and n is a small number, here is like 3, with n questions or variables, and n plus 1 exits, here 4. A full tree with binary variables would have 2 to the n exits. It will always go through everything. And you can imagine that soon it becomes overly complex. And at some point, intractable. Now, look at this tree again. In a hiring decision, just like all decisions, you can make 2 errors. Either a miss or a false alarm. A miss would mean here that you don't make an offer to a person who would deserve an offer. That would be here, not higher. A false alarm is you make an offer to someone, a decision that you will regret later. And depending on how you build a tree, it can minimize the misses or minimize false alarms. There's a trade-off between. What does this tree minimize? Misses or false alarms? Just look at the exits. Not higher, not higher, not higher. What has this consequence? You minimize misses or false alarms. Which of this? So you minimize false alarms. False alarms would be you make too many offers to people that don't. Yeah? And for every tree with 3 variables as here, in the same order, you can construct how many variants? Who's at 4? Yes. Here are the 4. So I'll give you a lecture in constructing trees and thinking about trees. Huh? Here are the 4s. On the left side, Bezos tree, minimize false positive. On the right side, a tree that minimizes misses. It says higher, higher, higher. And in between, trees that go zigzag. They're very interesting. So depending on what your problem is, you can design it this way, or in between. Now, an important heuristic that I use when I don't understand a heuristic, like here, I'll try to map it into something I understand. And what's often easy to understand are optimization models. So here's a use to bring these together. And so you may have heard of signal detection theory. This is, if you're a statistician, it's Neyman Pearson theory. And it solves the same problem. And so according to signal detection theory on the top, there are 2 distributions. Now we are in probability theory. And there's a criterion. And if the data falls on the one side, you decide this way, and there's one this way, like higher or not higher. That's the type. Signal detection theory is an optimization model. And it has difficulties with more than one variable. A fast and frugal tree can have 3, 4, 5, 6 can easily do them. Signal detection theory also needs to make lots of assumptions about distributions. The tree doesn't have to do that. But it can help to understand. And the result that we have published is that these 4 trees, they map into 4 points on the receiver operator curve. That's, I'm not going into more detail. If you want to know about that, just read it. That I found this a kind of discovery and deep insight to understand how these worlds hang together. And if you want to know more about constructing trees for your own life, not just for hiring, here is a book we wrote. It's a book that really tells how to do it, and not only fast and frugal trees, but also tallying systems, so like Markowitz use, so equal. And all of these is compared to machine learning methods, like random forests. And they're very interesting things. You can try, random forest tries everything and comes up at the end with one tree. And these trees are often fast and frugal trees. So you could do them from the beginning. More in this. And I give you now an example of an application. The work with the Bank of England has been mentioned before. And what we did is to design a diagnostic system that can find out whether a bank is in trouble or not. And it's again a fast and frugal tree. And it asks just 3 questions: whether the leverage ratio is lower than a certain value. The numerical values are all estimated from data. We worked with the economists of the Bank in England. They had never heard of fast and frugal trees. So we gave them the ideas. And they used the data to fill in. And just to give you an example, if that tree would have been used before the crisis of 2008, UBS, the bank that had to be saved, would have been flagged as red. UBS had a worse leverage ratio, and it would not have passed the first step. UBS would have met the other 2 criteria, but a fast and frugal tree is not like a linear model or like utility maximization. It is non-compensatory. If you fail on the first one, that's it, period. All the other ratios can be brilliant. No. It's very different from the traditional mathematical models. But just think a moment. Many things in life are non-compensatory. If your heart fails, a good liver doesn't help you. And we structure actually our entire world with non-compensatory rules, so lexicographic rules, like traffic rules. If there's a policeman, that's it. If there's no policeman, then the traffic light decides. If there are no traffic lights, then right before left decides, and so on. Yeah? There's no compensation. If there would be compensation, like a weight of 0.5 to the policeman and a weight of 0.4 to the traffic light and a weight of 0.3, safety would be gone. And it's not the only thing. Yeah? Think about the FIFA rules in the world. That they're all non-compensatory. Yeah? These are ordered structures. Yeah? And we need to have the courage to think out of the box of rationality and do the mathematics of ordered structures. And they're often much better for safety than what's being done. What's being done in the financial world are regulations and estimations for vulnerability that have to do with the regulation of Basel II and III. So if you are the CEO of a big bank, and you have to do thousands of risk factors, and they all correlate, so you have to estimate a correlation matrix in the order of millions in order to calculate your value at risk. That's the probability version of all of that, assuming a world of risk. Good luck. And you do this from 5 to 10 years of data. And it also opens the ability to cheat. So banks want to keep a low capital and then try to manipulate the values so that they look better as they really are. The simple trees can also be cheated, but you see it immediately. That's a difference. So the former chief economist of the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, has given a talk about simple heuristics in order to make the world of banking safer. That was unheard of. It was already in 2012. That was the first year we worked together. And he was supposed to give the Jackson Hole talk for the big bank, the supervisors of the banks, like the Bank of England. And I gave him, as an example, the gaze heuristic. This is how a baseball player catches a ball. The player does not calculate the trajectory, which is impossible. The calculation is not the problem, but the estimation of all these variables, like the initial angle with which the ball was thrown or kicked. And but the gaze heuristic just looks at one thing, namely the angle of gaze, and keeps it constant. So to illustrate it, you face if the ball is already high up, you face the ball, and then you run in a way so that the angle of gaze always remains constant, and it will end up where the ball is without any calculation. And the same with dogs and frisbees. Observe your dog. Andy Haldane gave his Jackson Hole talk the title, The Dog and the Frisbee. And made the point, banks are not in a world of risk, but of uncertainty. And we need robust heuristics, not optimization there. Optimization makes you fragile. And the Wall Street Journal gave it the title of the speech of the year. But the banking world is still very conservative. And the term optimization is probably the most misused term that we have, certainly among that. People optimize themselves. Good luck. So now let's have a look at ecological rationality. Remember, the question is, can we find out, can we prove the conditions where a certain strategy works and not works? And I give you just one result, which is simple and intuitive. And it's about heuristics that only use one reason for making decision. So the fast and frugal trees use only one reason for making decisions. They may search through more, but they use only one. There's no integration. That's what the term non-compensatory or lexicographic means. So can you think about a condition? So think about a prediction. You have 5 variables to make it simpler, and they're all binary. And you have a binary criterion. Under what condition would a heuristic that just looks at one of these be as good as any linear model that integrates all of them? If you have no answer, no problem. It took us a long time to find the answers. Here is a condition. There are several. There's one. It's called the dominant Q condition. So the weights here are like regression weights. That's the additional contribution of a Q to the rest. So if the weight of the first Q is as large or larger than the sum of all the remaining, then you can just go with one Q. And you can't be beaten by a linear model, and you're much faster and more frugal, and it's totally transparent what you're doing. So this is an instance of ecological rationality that also shows that many of the so-called biases that have been diagnosed in behavioral economics aren't any biases. So if you ignore information, as you would do here, that is not necessarily something wrong. If that condition holds, it's the best you can do. Then the next question is, how often do these conditions hold? And we have analyzed, now this is a difficult question to answer because we cannot count all the worlds. So we have used the machine learning data sets that are open, and this and two other conditions we've looked up. One of them, all are sufficient that just one reason cannot be beaten by linear models, holds in the majority of the cases, and often approximately. So that's the kind of thinking. So we should not take a simple heuristic as irrational because it looks simple. We should test that. We should try to understand why people rely on these, and it's not because people are necessarily dumb. As we have learned after 30 years of Kahneman and Tversky messages and Thaler and Sunstein and so on, that we are so dumb that we need to be nudged around like sheep. I think we need to get a better understanding. So the usual, traditional way to understand why people use heuristics is either because they have cognitive biases, or they have limited understanding, or they're just lazy. And the most friendly one is this one, namely there's an accuracy-effort trade-off. And it basically says heuristics are simple, they save you effort and time, but you pay a price in accuracy. It is true that heuristics are simple and save you time. It is not true that therefore they are less accurate. And the thinking model for the accuracy-effort trade-off is total error is bias plus noise. Noise is something that you cannot reduce, and bias in this view is something that you should reduce to zero. That model is valid in a world of risk, but not in a world of uncertainty. Under uncertainty, we can think in terms of the bias-variance trade-off, machine learning. And machine learning is a discipline that knows that there are very few problems where you can optimize. And here, the total error is a function of a bias and a variance and the noise. So the problem is no longer to reduce bias to zero, but find a trade-off between bias and variance. What is variance? Now, I'll show you this with an analogy. There are, so the statistical definition is you have a population, you draw many, many samples, and then every sample gives you a different estimate, and then that's the variance of the estimates among the mean. But more intuitively, think about two dart players. The one on the left side has a bias. His darts, the crosses, they're all too far to the right and down. But they have little variance. They're close together. On the right side, there's a dart player who has zero bias because the darts are all in the middle on average, but a huge variance. And that example shows you that it may be better to have a bias than no bias, because there's another element, the variance. And you can do a little bit statistical things, and you know how you can reduce variance. But the point is that heuristics that have no free parameter reduce variance to zero. If you don't have a free parameter, you have nothing to estimate. And you always throw your dart in the same hole. See that? So this is one of the reasons why Markowitz's Nobel Prize winning model may be inferior to 1 over n. Markowitz's model has a bias and variance. And the variance will be the lower, the more data there is, the higher, the less data, and the higher, the larger n is. 1 over n has no variance, no error by variance, because it doesn't estimate. It is a heuristic that is based on zero data. It's the opposite of big data. Nevertheless, under uncertainty, it can perform well. It's also a remark on where big data will work. If you have a stable world, where tomorrow is like yesterday, that's the world of big data in estimation. If it's unstable, it doesn't work well. Unstable is typically the case when AI models predict human behavior. There's little success there. So recidivism predictions are not better than if you have just 2 or 3 variables. And predictive policing is a marketing hype. So the key message is, this is one way to understand why and when heuristics work. And the reason is because they reduce variance. They may have a bias, stronger, but if the condition holds that I've showed before, the bias is not larger than any linear model. So that's a way to analytically understand, and also a way to see when a heuristic will function and when not. Here is some methodological principles that are important in our work. First, we need algorithmic models of heuristics, not labels like representativeness, availability, or affect, which mean many different things and are usually used as post hoc explanations. Even a simple heuristic like 1 over m, you can simulate it and see whether it works. I mean, system 1, I have this on the thing, yeah? I consider this the absolute nadir of theorizing in psychology. There's no model in shooting distance. Everything, if you err, it was system 1. If you don't err, it was system 2. I did some research on an independent topic on the historical conceptions of female intelligence, and you find it there. In the 19th century, the difference between male and female intelligence was women are intuitive, we are rational, deliberate. Huh? Women are fast, they talk all the time, yeah, and don't think. Huh? We are slow, and it goes on. Women are associative, yeah, and at the end, it's them who make the errors, and in the 19th century, a man, the husband, may be responsible for the wife's errors because she is not responsible for what she's doing. And you can see here how an old-fashioned misconception about male and female came back as the big theory today, now cleans from the gender issues. Okay. Competitive testing, very important. Machine learning does it all the time, but not in the social sciences. Where it's often you test your favorite idea against null hypothesis, which you specify, but you favor the idea you don't specify it even, only claim victory if there's significance. That's not good science. You need to test, like in the very example, 1 over n against a Nobel Prize winning strategy, not against null. And finally, out of sample and out of population prediction. We have 3 different ways to calculate predictive accuracy. The first one is outright cheating. It means you, you fit your model to the data, and then report a big R square with 3 stars behind it. And this is not science. But most of the social sciences do it, particularly economics. It's not prediction. You have the data already. And if you have sufficient free parameters, you can model. You always get a big R square. Machine learning does out of sample. That's progress. It means you have your data, yes, but you divide it in 2 halves, or need not be halves, or in 2 parts. And then you fit your model and the competing models on one data set and test them on the other one. So this is progress. But particularly with deep neural networks that can fool you. Because deep neural networks can detect things that are irrelevant in the pictures they are trained, and claim victory out of sample, but fail when they're tested in the real world. There is a very nice story that illustrates that. It's an urban myth, but it has the consequence. It's called the Russian tank fallacy. So, according to the story, the US Army wanted to have a deep neural network, an AI that can tell Russian from US tanks. So how do you do it? You have 1,000 and 10,000 photos of Russian tanks and 1,000 or 10,000 photos of US tanks, and then you have a machine that learns, and with out of sample. And finally, it was almost perfect. Then they tested the AI in the real world with real tanks, not pictures, real tanks, and it flopped. What was the problem? The engineers detected when they checked the pictures that the American tanks were photographed with a blue sky, the Russian with a slightly clouded sky. And the AI detected the one variable that perfectly discriminated between the two. See that? Same things happen in hospitals with things. So one always has to test any claim about whether it's an AI that can now, I read it every day, that an AI can do something as good as doctors. And it's never said, was this data fitting? Was this out of sample prediction? Or was this really tested in another clinic? That means out of population. And it's very important, because with these deep neural networks, we don't know what they're looking for. And they may find something that is highly discriminating on the pictures, but not on the world. So for instance, in the Mount Sinai hospital, they had developed an AI to tell patients that are on high risk from low risk for lung disease. And the system was almost perfect in out-of-sample prediction. And I tested it in a different hospital. It didn't work anymore. What was the Russian tank fallacy here? Now, the system had detected whether the X-rays were taken in the radiology department or with a portable X-ray machine. When does one use a portable X-ray machine? If the patient is so in bad conditions and also prone to lung infections. And it has detected that difference. This is why out-of-population prediction is the real test, particular for AI. So now let me go to the last point, intuitive design. And I just give you one application we've worked the last time, which I'm very excited about. It's credit scoring. Every one of you has a credit score. Does any one of you know your credit score? No. But if you want to rent a flat, you may be asked by the owner, bring the credit score. And if you don't bring it, you may no longer be in the choice set. Or banks. If you take a loan, then the bank asks itself for your credit score without telling you. And depending on how it is, you get a loan, and it's on what condition. So the point is that these credit scores, here are 3, are black box models. They're proprietary. Nobody knows. You may know your credit score, but not how it's being calculated. Or does anyone here know how? No. I worked with the Schufa. Schufa is the largest German credit scorer. They're all private companies. And it was a special occasion. Namely, in Germany, people went on the streets and protested against these black box models. Because they were not getting good conditions, and because they had not good values and didn't understand what they have done. That was one condition, precondition for what I will tell you was able. Another one was that there was a new head of the Schufa, and she was willing to consider the possibility to go transparent. And I was in the advisory committee of the German Ministry for Law and Consumer Protection, and I've co-authored a report where we asked that all sensitive scores should be made transparent to the public and not only to data protectors. And as usually when you, as a scientist, are in a committee, even in the government ministry, and write that, you hand it in and nothing happens. You just wasted another year of your life for something that nobody wanted to really see. But in this case, it was different. The new head of the Schufa had read it and asked her own people, how did you react? And they said, not at all. That's what you think. But she was under pressure, public pressure. So we met, and she asked, is it feasible to get transparent? And she had all the concerns, namely, competitors would copy then their algorithm. And I said, look, it's not just about the algorithm, it's about your data. And you have more data in Germany than anyone else. And also, a competitor would be stupid if, for the minor ones, if we would just copy that, then what's the point of having a competitor who tries to do the same thing? And there were a number of other concerns she had. Then we started to work with the software engineers of the Schufa, and it turned out that their algorithm, the major algorithm they had, cannot be made transparent. Why? It had more than 250 variables. They were interconnected in totally unsystematic ways, with thousands of interconnections, in a way that nobody could tell anything precise outcome. For instance, if you have too many credit cards, score goes down. But not always, because of the interactions. Sometimes it does not go down. How would you explain this to anyone, public? And with 250 variables. So then we try to convince them that this is a world of uncertainty, not of risk. You're predicting human behavior, whether people pay and in time. And in that world, it's most likely that if you make it simpler, to some point, you won't lose any accuracy, but you will win transparency. They didn't really believe it because they had seen this kind of figures that you find in many publications, where there's an alleged trade-off between models being interpretable, understandable, and predictive accuracy. You see, the claim is that rule-based, these are heuristics, would be the best understandable, true, but also the worst one. And deep neural network would be the least understandable, true, but always the best one. Not true, not always. And the rest in between. What credit scorers do is to use a mixture between linear regression and decision trees. The software engineers had tried to use deep neural networks on the top, but they're worse than regression. Just to give you an idea about this. When you see these kind of figures, you will rarely find any data. It's just made up. If it's heuristic, must be bad. So, to make it short, we'll test it with their own data and found that we can actually reduce, without loss of accuracy, the 250 variables, including their interactions, to only 12, with no interactions, and with a very simple scoring system. I'll show you this now. This is still fiction because it will be released only next year. This is why I have to put the term fictional on it, just to explain that. But what will be released will be very, very simple to that. So there are 12 variables. And just to get you the idea, I take out one, number of credit cards. So if you have none, it's not good. If you have one, you get positive points. The positive points are added to a base score of 760. It goes up to 999. If you have two, that's worse than having none. And if you have 3 or 4 or more, it really gets down. So this is totally understandable. The values are all calculated from the data. And they are rounded so that every person can do the calculation itself. It will be the first credit score that is not only transparent, but also where every person can calculate their own credit score. There's no black boxes anymore. And people can actually then change their behavior if they want. So what you can see is here, you should have only one credit card. Second, keep it as long as possible. Don't change it. And pay your credits back in time. And these are some of the simple rules that people can use if they want. And it's part of a program which I call psychological AI, which pushes the so-called XIAI problem, which is usually treated, here is a complex algorithms, and we need that. That's never questions. And explain it in some other terms. Yeah? We push it, is this complex algorithm really needed? Do we need a black box? Or can't we do better by being transparent in the first place? And if we can do this more often, we can get this world in which we are now living, where more and more algorithms that we do not understand direct our lives, to open a little bit of window into this, so that we, in certain parts, and credit scoring is one of these, start to understand what these algorithms do and how we can react to that, which is not possible if you don't know how it works. So, let me come to the end. There are three misconceptions I've been talking about. Rational behavior requires maximization of expected utility. So this is the current, it's not only a misunderstanding in economics, but also in behavioral economics. So Kahneman and Tversky have shown, and before Allais and others, that people deviate, but they blame the people and not the theory. See that? So these psychologists are some of the most faithful believers in this content-blind type of rationality. Second, misconception. Heuristics are biases causing poor decisions. The alignment heuristics and biases is made up. Heuristics are ecologically rational. They depend, in this situation they work, and there they don't work. And finally, more information and computation is always better. No. Under uncertainty, that's not the case. And for instance, take the Markowitz example again. 1 over n uses no data. Period. It's just robust. There are other principles. Finally, the confusion between situations of risk. And most of behavioral economics is about situations of risk. You recognize a situation of risk because the researcher always knows what's right. There's no uncertainty. In most of real problems, we don't know what the right thing is. So the confusion of situations of uncertainty with situations of risk is known as the turkey illusion. So why turkey? Assume you are a turkey. It is the first day of your life, and a man comes in, and you think he will kill me. No, he feeds you. Second day of your life, the man comes in again, and you think he will kill me, but he feeds you. Third day of your life, exactly the same thing. By Bayesian updating, every day, the probability that he will feed you and not kill you gets higher. On day 100, it's higher than ever before. It's the day before Thanksgiving and you're dead meat. The turkey confused uncertainty with risk. But really, turkeys probably don't do that. It's us. Here is a quote by a famous economist, Milton Friedman, who said, Knight, this is Frank Knight, who distinguished between risk and uncertainty. I shall never again refer to uncertainty. All uncertainty can be reduced to risk. Milton Friedman is a turkey. And the turkey illusion has cost us lots. Here's another turkey statement. In 2003, in his presidential address to the American Economic Society, Robert Lucas, another Nobel laureate, argued, my thesis in this lecture is that macroeconomics has succeeded. Its central problem of depression prevention has been solved for all practical purposes. 5 years later, one of the greatest depressions hit. The models that he was referring to were models of risk. And that's making generalizations from risk to the real world is another turkey illusion. But economists are changing, even macroeconomists. And here is an example, a group around Joe Stiglitz was doing modeling real macroeconomic environments that are volatile, that are not a world of risk where things happen. And they have tested standard macroeconomic models against one of our heuristics, a very simple heuristic, recency. In order to predict demand, you take the last data point and ignore everything else. And it came out as the winner. And they convinced themselves, right here, that fast and frugal, robust heuristics may not be the second best option, but rather rational responses in a complex and changing environment. So we see here, things are changing, but we need more people who have the courage to get rid of the optimization illusion. You can optimize in certain worlds, but not everywhere. You need a toolbox. So in this talk, I introduced Homo Heuristicus, who needs to live in a world of uncertainty where we cannot know everything and cannot know what the optimal solution is. And the key points were, risk is not the same as uncertainty. Decision-making under uncertainty requires heuristics. And the problem is one of ecological rationality. In what situation is it likely that that strategy functions, in what not? And the interesting thing is that one of the things that can happen under uncertainty is what we call less is more effects. You've seen a few. Namely, by relying on less information or not even looking up the information, in the extreme no information, in certain situations, you can do as well or better than getting more information. And in addition, things become transparent, things become cheaper and more economical. And finally, uncertainty is not something that one should avoid or deny. It is the driver of human intelligence. The human brain evolved to deal with uncertainty from predators, from weather, and the greatest uncertainty are other humans. Not with situations of risk, not a casino, not the usual stock in trades like lotteries. And without uncertainty, intelligence would not be necessary. Emotions would not be necessary. We would already know everything that can happen, and surprise, hope, or disappointment wouldn't be here. And for economics, innovation would not happen. Because in a small world, we know already everything, including the probabilities. So we need to do two things: take uncertainty seriously and take heuristics seriously and study how they work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Gigerenzer.